can start Bora Bora by setting up the game board area. They first set out the 12 fish tiles, with one on each of the fish symbols on the game board. Shuffle the 36 man tiles and place them face up next to the board, near the man display. Flip up the top 6 cards from the pile and place them on the man display. Shuffle the 36 woman cards and place them in piles next to the woman display on the game board. Flip up the top 6 woman tiles and place them on the woman display. Separate the 7 light green crane tiles from the dark green parrot tiles. Shuffle the parrot cards and place them in piles near the task display on the game board. Flip up task cards and place them in the task tile display. The number of task cards flipped up is equal to the number of players plus 2. Make sure to remove the 2 blank parrot cards. These are replacements that may be used if another parrot card is lost or damaged. Shuffle the 24 jewelry tiles and randomly place them face up onto the jewelry area of the game board. Place 6 god tiles on the matching picture on the status track. Shuffle the god cards and place them face down in a pile by the game board. Flip up the top 5 cards next to the pile. Place all building materials, shell tokens, and offering tokens in a supply area that all players can access. Place the action tiles face up next to the game board. There are some variations in the number of tiles played based on the number of players. With 2 players, 5 tiles are placed. The helper, the temple, the build, the man and woman, and the land and water path. With 3 players, 6 tiles are placed. The helper, the temple, the build, the man, the woman, and the land water path. And with 4 players, all 7 tiles are placed. The helper, the temple, the build, the man, the woman, the land path, and the water path. It should be noted that the man-woman tile is on the back of the woman tile, and the land-water path is on the back of the land path. Each individual player will get the following game components: 1 player board, 6 building tiles, 3 dice, 4 priests, 2 markers, and 12 hut pieces, all in the same color. Each player will place one of their huts on each hut icon on their player board. The final space on the player board gets 2 huts. Each player will also place their 6 building tiles on their game board. Each player will also get 2 god cards from the draw deck as their hand of cards, 2 offerings, 1 god tile, not one of the god tiles from the pile of the 6 god tiles on the game board, and 2 parrot tiles and 1 crane tile. Players will place their 2 parrot tiles and their 1 crane tile on their task area to the bottom of their player board. Any of the crane tiles that players did not use for their player game board will be removed from the game. Finally, each player gets 1 randomly drawn turn tile. If you are playing with less than 4 players, remove the turn order tiles that are not needed before randomly drawing. Before starting play, the players establish the playing order. The player who drew the 1 turn order card is the starting player. The starting player places one of their markers on the start of the scoring track. The other marker goes on the status track below the 0. The player with the 2 turn order card is the next player to play. They start the game with 1 victory point. They also place their other marker on the 0 of the status track, but they place it below the starting player's marker. In a 3-player game, the third player would start with 2 victory points. And in a 4-player game, the 4th player would start with 3 victory points. A 3rd player would also follow the pattern of placing their marker on the status track by placing it under the 1st and 2nd player. A 4th player would do the same, but place their marker at the bottom of the pile. When all players have placed their markers on the status mark, they should be in order, from first player to last player. Players now place their first huts on the game board. This occurs in reverse play order, so the last player will be the first player to do this, and the first player will be the last player to do this. Players remove a hut from anywhere on their player board, but it is recommended that they not take from one of the 2 on the 12th spot. The hut is placed on the game board on a region area that has a fish tile with a 1 next to it. The hut is placed inside of the box in this region. Players may not place their hut on a region with another player already on it in this step. They will then receive the resource or offering piece that corresponds to the region they built their first hut. Building in the mountains gives a stone. Building on a forest gives a wood resource. Building on a beach gives a sand resource. And building in the plains gives an offering token. Any building material a player receives is placed on the corresponding picture in the ceremony space of the player board. Any offering tokens a player receives are placed to the side of the player board. Once each player has placed their first hut in a unique region next to a 1 fish token, this step is complete, and players move into the 3 phases of the game, starting with Phase A. To start Phase A, all players will roll their 3 dice at the same time. The players will now place their dice, one at a time, in turn order, until all of their dice are gone. When they place a die, they will always either place it on an action tile or in the fishing area. To play on an action tile, a player will choose one of their rolled die from the beginning of the phase and place it on the action tile. If the player plays on an empty action tile, they may choose any die value that action allows. If there is already a die or dice in the action tile, a player may only place another die on this action tile if the value of the die they are adding is less than the lowest current die value. Any time a player places a die on an action tile, they will immediately do the corresponding action. A land or water path may be used to expand a player's area on the game board. Players may expand on a land path with a land action tile or a water path with a water action tile. If the land-water path tile is in play, a player may decide whether they would like to expand via land or water. The land or water path a player decides to expand on must be adjacent to one of their existing huts. A player may also only expand if they have the proper die value to do so. Each land or water path has a value on it. This value tells the lowest die value a player can use to expand on this path. A land path with a 4 on it could be expanded on if a player placed a die with a value of 4, 5, or 6 on the land path action card. Using a water path follows the same rules as a land path. Expanding is done in the same way that a player places their first hut. They remove a hut from their player board, place their hut on a region connected by a land or water path to one of their other huts, and finally gain the resource that corresponds to the region they settled in. Unlike while placing the first hut, a player may now move to a location that has another hut already in it. If a player is moving to a region that already contains a hut, they will simply remove the current hut in the box out of the box and replace it with their own. The other player's hut will remain in the region just off to the side. Each player may only have one of their huts in a particular region. The last step of expanding via a water path or a land path is deciding whether or not to score the fish tile next to the region you just settled in. A player may only do this if they discard a red God card. This will be explained further in the God card video. The man and woman action tiles are used to gain a man or a woman tile. Woman tiles help a player collect shells, which allows them to buy jewelry. Men allow a player to gain tattoos, which give the player status on the status track. If a player plays on the woman action card, they immediately choose one of the face-up woman tiles on the board. They may choose any available tile that is in a die location that is less than or equal to the die they place on the card. So if a player plays a 4 on a woman action, they may choose a woman tile from the 1, 2, 3, or 4 location, but not the 5 or 6. If they play in the man action, they choose a man tile from the position that is less than or equal to the die value they placed on the action. Any tile that is claimed from the man or woman track will not be replaced. If the man-woman tile is in play, they treat it the same way as a man or woman action, but they may instead choose to take either a man or a woman tile. When a player gains either a man or woman tile, they immediately place it on one of their open areas of their player board. Open areas are places that do not contain huts. Each open area may only contain one man or woman tile. If a player does not have any open areas in this section, because they are either filled with a man, a woman, or a hut, they may not place their die on the woman or man actioned. The temple action gives players a fire bonus, and also a chance to score victory points and gain a god tile at the end of the round. If a player places their die on a temple action, they immediately take one of their priests and add it to the temple section of the game board. They may place their priest on any value on this temple track that is less than or equal to the number of the die they placed on the action. For instance, if they place a 2 on the temple action, they could place their priest on only the 1 or 2 spaces on the temple track. If another priest piece is already on the space you would like to place on, their piece is shifted to the next space, in the direction of the arrows on the board, to make room for your piece. Priests are shifted down the line until only one priest is on each space. If a priest is pushed off of the track, they are removed from the board and returned to their owner. When a player places a new priest, they immediately receive a fire bonus. A fire bonus allows the player to choose a god card or an offering token, and move one space up on the status track, or take one shell. Players that place a die in the build action are able to build one of their building tiles. A player may build any building that displays a die number that is less than or equal to the value of the die they played on the build action. Therefore, a player who placed a 3 on the build action could build a 1, 2, or 3 building tile. Players may only choose the build action if they have 2 resources next to each other in their ceremony space, either horizontally or vertically. With this in mind, players should place their resources wisely on the ceremony track, because they may not rearrange them, and bad placement may hinder the ability to build. When they build a building tile, they remove the corresponding building materials from their player board and return them back to the supply. And then they place their building tile where the resources were. Building tiles are never allowed to be moved once they are placed in the ceremony space. The player immediately scores points for the building tile based on the current round of play. The amount of points that they score can be found above the jewelry track. In rounds 1 and 2, a player scores 10 victory points per building tile. In rounds 3 and 4, they score 7 points. And in rounds 5 and 6, they score 4 points. When a player builds a building tile, they also get the fire bonus. A fire bonus allows the player to choose a god card or an offering token, and move one space up on the status track, or take one shell. If a player places a die on the helper action, they may trade different items. The number that a player rolls indicates the number of items one can trade for, so placing a 5 gives a player 5 trading points to trade for other things. The trade value of items is indicated on the player board at the top left-hand corner. A 1-to-1 trading ratio can be used for one of 3 things: tattooing a man, collecting shells from a woman, or gaining victory points. To tattoo a man, a player slides them down to show the green check mark. Each man may only be tattooed once. This gives the player the amount of status points on the status track that corresponds to the number of tattoo symbols on the tile. If your movement on the status track puts you in the same place as another marker, simply put your marker on top of their marker. If a player decides to collect shells from a woman tile, they simply move it down, in the same way that they did while tattooing a man. They then collect the number of shells from the supply that corresponds to the number on the woman tile. If a player decides to trade for victory points, they simply move up their scoring marker 1 point for every die point they traded. A 2-to-1 ratio, with 2 dice points being traded for 1 item, may be used to move 1 hut to the 12th spot on the board. This frees up space on the player board to put a man or woman tile without having to use a build action to build a hut. There is no limit to the number of huts that can be placed on the 12th spot. Gain 1 offering token. Gain 1 God card, either from the top of the deck or one of the face-up cards. Or choose a resource of one's choice. A player can use any combination of 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio trades that are of a value of less than or equal to the value of the die that they placed on the helper action. If a player does not want to or is unable to place on an action card, they may place in the fishing area. There is no limit to the number of dice that can be placed in this area. A player may also place a die of any value in this area. They are not restricted to playing a lower value die. Any die a player places in the fishing area immediately scores them 2 victory points. After all players have placed all of their dice on either an action card or in the fishing area, Phase A is complete, and they may move on to Phase B. In Phase B, players decide if they would like to use the abilities of the man and woman tiles that they have placed on their player board. Each individual man or woman action gives players a bonus of sorts. These actions can do things such as allowing player to take a man or woman tile, build a building tile, or move on a land or water path without having to place any die. The picture on the right side of the man or woman tile symbolizes the special action the tile has. See the cheat sheet section of the site for full descriptions of each symbol. Using the current player turn order, players may decide if they want to use their man and woman actions. Each player may use the action of up to 1 man and 1 woman tile. If a player has more than one of an identical type of symbol in one gender, the effect of the matching tiles can be combined for a single more powerful action. This is also described further in the cheat sheet section of the site. Whether or not the man or woman tile is shifted down on the board does not matter in this stage. The effects are the same either way. After each player decides whether or not to use their man and woman actions, Phase B is complete, and they move into Phase C. On the right side of each man and woman tile, there is a special symbol. This symbol represents the action that the tile can give a player during Phase B. There are 12 individual symbols, and each symbol can be found on both 3 man tiles and 3 woman tiles. Each symbol gives a different special ability to a player, regardless of if it is moved down on the player board or not. Each symbol will be briefly explained. For instance, This symbol allows a player to move their status marker up 1 on the status track. This symbol allows a player to gain 2 victory points. Each of these tiles gives a player different things. This symbol gives a player 1 offering. This, 1 shell. This allows a player to choose 1 resource of their choice. And this allows a player to gain 1 God card. This symbol allows a player to move one of their huts to the 12th space on the player board. This opens up a spot for a player to place a man or woman action tile. There are also 5 different actions that have die values on them. For instance, this symbol gives a player the same ability as if they had played a 3 on a build action tile. The die value on this action is 3. So a player may build any of their building tiles that equal up to 3. They must have corresponding resources next to each other in order to do this. These symbols are the same as if a player had played a 3 on the man or the woman action tile. When a player uses this symbol on either their man or woman tile, the tile has a 3 on it. So a player may choose a man tile from the 1, 2, or 3 position. And if they had one of the woman symbols, they could choose a woman tile from either the 1, 2, or 3 position. These tiles allow a player to move as if they had placed on a water path or a land path. The value on this is 2. So if a player uses the action of one of their land symbols on a man or woman tile, they can move across a land path with a value up to 2. Similarly, with a water path symbol, a player could move across a water path with a value up to 2. If a player chooses to use one of the land or water symbols on a man or woman action tile, they must follow the normal expand rules and may only expand to a region that is adjacent to one of their other huts. A player gains an extra bonus for having multiple matching symbols on their player board. The bonus they gain is that they multiply whatever the normal effect of that action is by the number of tiles of that same matching symbol type they have. So this player would normally gain 1 resource of their choice for having this symbol, but since they have 3 matching symbols, they now gain 3 resources of their choice. Similarly, if a player has a symbol that has a die value on it, they multiply that die value by the number of tiles, with a max die value of 6. So this player has 2 matching tiles with a 3 die value on them for the build action. Now, instead of building a building tile with a max value of 3, they can build any building tile up to the 6 building tile. Phase C consists of players assessing the right half of the board. Assessing the board consists of scoring victory points, purchasing items, and resolving tasks. A player always assesses the board in the same order. First, the status track. Second, the temple. Third, the jewelry. And finally, the task tiles. To assess the status track, each player scores the number of victory points corresponding to the space of their status marker. They will score between 0 and 15 points, depending on where their status marker is. After the player scores on the status track, they will move back to the 0 space. All players stack their markers in order of their status at the time of scoring. The player with the highest status at the end of the round has their marker on the top of the pile, and they become the new starting player. The turn order tiles are reassigned based on the new order on the status track. While scoring the temple, players receive victory points for each of their priests on the track. The chart between the temple and the jewelry tells the amount of points that a player scores. In rounds 1 and 2, players receive 1 victory point per priest in the temple. In rounds 3 and 4, players receive 2 victory points per priest in the temple. And in rounds 5 and 6, players receive 3 victory points per priest in the temple. The player with the most priests played gets a god tile from the board. If there is a tie in the temple for the most priests, the player involved in the tie, whose priest is the furthest along to the left on the track, gains the god tile. If there are no priests on the temple track, the god tile is removed from the game. The third place assessed is the jewelry area. This step occurs in the new play order established during the temple phase. Players may choose to buy 1 jewelry tile from the column of the current round. The cost of each piece of jewelry is shown at the bottom in shells. A player pays for the jewelry with shells by placing the amount of shells back in the supply. Any jewelry purchased is placed in this location, face down. A player does not have to buy jewelry on their turn. After each player has had a chance to buy jewelry, the remaining jewelry pieces are removed from the game. The final step of Phase C is to assess the task tiles. This step also occurs in the new play order. To do this, players look to the 3 tasks at the bottom of their player board. Players must choose one of these 3 tasks to complete. These tiles have different requirements that must be satisfied in order for the task to be considered complete. For instance, this card requires a player to have 3 priests in the temple. For more on the individual meanings of the task tiles, see the cheat sheet section of the site. If the player can complete the task without any help from a god card, they get 6 victory points. If they require the help of a yellow god, which will be explained further in the gods video, they get 4 victory points. When a task is completed with or without help, a player flips it over and places it on the checkmark space until the end of the game. If a player can't complete any of the 3 tasks, they must choose 1 task to discard and return it to the game box, and no points are scored. Finally, the players choose a new task tile in turn order from the game board. The new tile they drew is added to their player game board. All remaining undrawn task tiles are removed from the game board and discarded from the game. New tiles are drawn and placed on the board, equal to the number of tiles that were previously in this area. All remaining man and woman tiles are now discarded and removed from the game. 6 new man and woman tiles are now placed on the board. All dice are also returned to their owners. The end of Phase C signals the end of a round of play. Players now enter a new round and start again at Phase A. During the game, a player will have a chance to complete their task tiles at the bottom of their player board to gain victory points. 12 of the tiles have something to do with the huts that a player places either on their player board or on the game board. These can be recognized by this hut symbol. These 4 task tiles require a player to have one of their huts in a region next to the indicated fish tile. These action tiles call for a player to have one hut in 3 regions of the indicated type: beach, mountain, forest, or plains. A region is any area such as the mountains, plains, beach, or forest. These tiles require a player to have one hut placed in 3 of any region of the game board, and this one hut in any 9 of any regions on the game board. This tile requires a player to have one hut in each of the 5 islands of the game board. The 5 islands are shown here. Finally, this hut action tile requires a player to have 4 huts placed on the 12th space of their player board. Other task tiles are directly related to the jewelry a player may choose to buy in Phase C. For example, in order to satisfy these task tiles, a player must have 2 of the indicated jewelry type shown. To complete these task tiles, a player must have purchased 4 jewelry tiles, and here they must have purchased 3 jewelry tiles that are not the same type. Several task tiles have to do with the man and woman tiles a player has placed on their player board. For instance, these task tiles require a player to have 4 woman tiles on their player board or 4 man tiles on their player board. These task tiles require a player to have 3 woman tiles that are not of equal symbols, and these require 3 man tiles that are not of equal symbols. Some man and woman action tiles have a plus symbol on them, meaning that you must fulfill both of the requirements. This one requires a player to have a man tile on their player board, as well as be the first player. This one requires a player to have 1 woman tile on their player board and also to have purchased at least 1 jewelry tile. This one requires a player to have 1 man tile on their player board as well as have 1 of their priests in the temple. And this one, similarly, 1 woman tile and 1 of their priests in the temple. And finally, this one requires a player to have 1 man tile and at least 1 woman tile on their player board. There are 12 task tiles that deal directly with the symbol shown on a man or woman action tile. These require a player to have 2 of the indicated symbol. The 2 symbols can be either in the man tile, the woman tile, or a combination of man and woman tiles. Finally, there are task tiles that have to do with collecting shells from a woman tile or tattooing a man tile. This one requires a player to have collected shells from 3 woman tiles on their player board, and this one requires a player to have tattooed 3 of their man tiles on their player board. This one requires 5 either tattooed men or women whose shells have been collected. These can be of either man, woman, or a combination. There are also task tiles that require a player to have certain items. These require players to have 4 offerings, 5 shells, 3 sand resources, 3 stone resources, 3 wood resources, or 5 of any type of the building resources. There are also task tiles that have to do with the god cards a player has acquired during the game. These tiles require a player to have 2 of the indicated god color cards in their hand. This tile requires a player to have 2 god tiles in their possession. These tiles require a player to have 3 god cards of equal color, and this one requires a player to have 4 god cards of unequal color. So, this hand would fulfill this task tile because there are 3 matching red god cards, and this hand would fulfill this one because there are 4 god cards of different colors. This tile requires a player to have 2 of their priests in the temple. This tile requires a player to have built 4 building tiles on their player board in the ceremony space. A player may choose to use 1 yellow god card per task tile to make the task slightly easier. The yellow god removes 1 requirement from the task tile. Basically, when a player plays a yellow god card from their hand, they may reduce the requirement on the task tile by 1. This task tile normally requires a player to have 3 stones, but if they use the yellow god, they could fulfill this requirement with only 2 stones. Players start the game with 2 god cards. When a player obtains another god card, they may choose to either take it from the top of the deck or from one of the face-up cards. If they choose a face-up card, they replace it with one from the deck. If the draw pile ever runs out, shuffle the discard pile and form a new draw pile. There are 5 different types of god cards used in the game. In order for a player to play a god card, they must discard an offering to the supply. They then discard their god card to a discard pile. Let's now look at what each of the gods do individually. The blue god may only be played during Phase A. This god allows a player to ignore the usual rule and allows a player to play a die to an action card, even if their die value is equal to or greater than the current lowest value. The blue god card only works for the player who used it, so any other players that play on the action must follow the normal rule and play a die lower than the lowest current die. The white god is only used in Phase A. A white god allows a player to add a die to an action tile as if its value was 6. The actual value of the die on the action card is not changed, so other players will place on this action card as if it is a normally placed die. When the player who played the white god does their action, they are allowed to use it as if it were 6. Players can choose to use the benefits of both a white god and a blue god together. So, they can use the benefits of the blue god to play a die that is equal to or greater than the lowest die, and use the die that they played as if it were a 6 when they do their action. A player may only use the red god card in Phase A or B while expanding via a land path or a water path. This allows a player to score the fish tile next to a new region they expanded to. The fish tile is not removed from the board, the player simply earns that amount of points. A green god may only be played in Phase B. While using a green god, a player may choose from one of two possible effects. First, a player may use a green god to double the effect of one of their man or woman actions. For instance, if a player were using this action, they would normally gain 1 resource, but if they played a green god card, they could gain 2 resources. If a player had 2 identical pictures on 2 identical man tiles, or 2 identical pictures on 2 identical woman tiles, and wanted to use a green god card with them, they would first gain the natural advantage that having 2 of the identical pictures would give them. And then they would double that effect with their green god card. For instance, a player with 2 of these identical symbols would gain 2 resources for 1 usage of a woman action. However, if they also played a green god card, they would be able to gain 4 resources. See the cheat sheet of the site for more individual information on symbols on the man and woman tiles. The other advantage a player could choose to have with the green god card would be the ability to use a second man or a second woman action. During Phase B, a player is normally allowed only 1 man action and 1 woman action to use. Playing a green god allows a player to use a second action of one of the genders. A yellow god card may only be played in Phase C. A yellow god allows a player to replace one of the task tile's requirements. For instance, this tile requires a player to have 5 shells to satisfy it. With a yellow god card, they would only need 4 shells. Using a yellow god card only gives a player 4 victory points instead of 6. Only 1 yellow god card is allowed per tile. A player may choose to play 1 offering to play 2 cards of the same color as any god card that they wish. A god tile may also be used as any god card. They do not need to use an offering to do this. The game ends after 6 rounds. A round consists of playing through Phase A, B, and C. At the end of the game, players replenish their task tiles, the same way they do at the end of Phase C. Each player now has a chance to complete all 3 of the remaining tasks on their player game board. If they complete them alone, they flip them up and place them on the pile and gain 6 victory points. If they complete them with the help of a yellow god card, they still flip them up and place them in their pile and receive 4 victory points. And if they cannot complete them, they still discard them and gain 0 points. Final scoring occurs when all players have resolved all of their tasks. Players score the following points. 2 victory points for every unused god tile left on their player board. The value of any fish tile that is next to a region they have placed the hut. The value of any jewelry tile they purchased during the game. 6 victory points for having 9 completed task tiles. 6 victory points for having 6 claimed jewelry tiles. 6 victory points for all 12 ceremony spaces full, with either building materials, building supplies, or a combination of both. 6 victory points for all 6 building tiles built. 6 victory points for building your huts in all 12 regions. And 6 points for filling the 12 spaces on their player board with either man or woman tiles. No victory points are awarded for excess building materials, god cards, offerings, or shells. The winner is the player who ends the game with the most victory points. In the event of a tie, the turn order is the tiebreaker. The player who went earlier in the turn order during the last phase is the winner.